I normally read from the complete works of Enrico Malatesta, Volume 3. And this is part of his complete works. It's by the same editor, David Turcato. This is an Enrico Malatesta reader, The Method of Freedom. And the reason I normally read from the Volume 3 is because the whole section of essays, one, they're a bunch of really short, like one-page essays, so it's not super boring trying to read things for people. And but the whole section of essays I was reading from is called Anarchism and Parliamentarism. And it's super, super relevant, even though it's 100 years old, to like what leftists are going through right now, and the sort of relationship between leftists and the squad and kind of all that stuff. And it makes really, really excellent comparisons with those. But I'm also working on doing a lot of studying and research and reading and writing on a manuscript about what I'm calling On the Revolutionary Project. And what I'm really exploring is the supposed historic differences and falling outs, as it were, between anarchists and communists. So, Dictatorship of the Proletariat, the Vanguard, Central Committees, how the Bolsheviks ran their revolution, and the anarchist critiques of those things. And I've been going back and looking at all the history of those things, right? Like, and the original people who wrote about it, who, Kropotkin and Emma Goldman and Bakunin and Marx and their disagreements and stuff, and really taking another look at it. And what I'm finding more often than not, fam, is that a lot of the things that we sort of take for granted in the, Twitter barfosphere as being the historic divisions that led to, the historic disagreements that led to divisions between anarchists and communists are more often than not, what I'm finding, not what we think they are. And more often than not, the anarchists and the communists then that are like historically sort of framed as being vehemently opposed to each other were really in far more agreement on a lot of these key issues. And, a quick example would be that a lot of people don't know that Mikhail Bakunin had what is essentially sort of a central committee or a vanguard party, if you were, that he called the International Brotherhood. And so we take for granted that Bakunin, was all up in Marxist shit because he was an authoritarian, because he advocated for, a dictatorship of the proletariat and that kind of stuff. And the argument is much more nuanced than that, because so the argument would be that anarchists have to be opposed to any type of central committee organizing or, any type of authoritative body or anything. And because of this falling out between Marx and Bakunin, and I'm finding, but Bakunin had a vanguard central committee. And anyway, that's just one example. And I think that Malatesta's essay, The Dictatorship of the Proletariat and Anarchy, is emblematic, or really illustrates in a large way what I'm trying to get at. He has a critique. He has a criticism of the way the Bolsheviks handled their shit. But overall, he's overwhelmingly supportive of their project. And I want to read the introduction from David Turcato before we get into the essay, because it's important to put it in context and framing of when Malatesta was writing and where he was coming from, because this is right up in the midst of the Bolshevik Revolution. So, Part 8, United Proletarian Front, the Red Biennium, Humanita Nova and Fascism, 1919 to 1923. When Malatesta returned to Italy on 24 December 1919, the effects of the war and the galvanizing example of Russia had created a situation that gave ground for strong revolutionary hopes. Malatesta was received with enthusiasm and even hailed as the, quote, Lenin of Italy. As he warned against such excesses, he set to work as editor of the anarchist daily Humanita Nova, which began publication in February 1920. First in the heat of the factory occupation, then after the revolutionary hopes had faded, and finally after the rise of fascism, Malatesta further elaborated his view, idealist and pragmatist at the same time, of the revolutionary process. He advocated a united front of all revolutionary forces, none of which was strong enough to win alone. He insisted on the practical measures and constructive work required in times of revolution, when no interruption in the provision of collective goods could be afforded, and he illustrated the humanist side of his anarchism, arguing that material interests were insufficient to bring about a revolution if they were not backed by an ideal, and reasserting love as the fundamental spring of anarchism. And, I also want to say, Malatesta was anarchist to the fucking bone, yo. So, he's one of those people that engaged in and indulged propaganda by the deed. And then ultimately later came to speak about how it not only was it counterproductive, it just didn't achieve not only did it not achieve his goals and the goals of the socialist project, it became counterproductive, and he did time and shit. Like, for instance, he and a handful of other people raided an armory and then took the state house. I believe this was in a city in Italy. Then took the state house, but he got all the state records and the city records and all the debts and everything for all the people in the community. Fucking burned it all. Gets all the weapons from the armory and distributes the guns to the armory, and all the weapons from the army to all the fucking people. And says, okay, let's do this. Let's fucking revolution time. And the people were like, yo, thanks for burning all our debts and our papers and shit. Like, seriously? Big ups? But like, nah, we good. And Malatesta did time for that. And in a lot of ways, anarchism was demonized in a very, very big way after that. So, this is a person, I illustrate that not to be like, wow, look how badass he was. But had he not been that anarchist that really tried the things that we now try to caution against as anarchists, this propaganda by the deed shit. Don't just willy-nilly go out bombing shit and fucking, you see what I'm saying? And assassinations. Holy crap. None of that's going to help us get the end of capitalism, right? But we needed people to do it to find out it wouldn't work and that it would backfire. And Malatesta is one of those people who did it and called himself out on it later in his writings. But here we are, this guy who's supposed to be, he's the quintessential sort of anarchist. And what did they write? The Lenin of Italy, though. This is blurring the lines between what we're supposed to be as anarchists and communists. But anyway, that's my big long-winded introduction, reading Torquato's introduction. But let's come over here where I have it set up so you can all look at what I'm reading. So this is The Dictatorship of the Proletariat and Anarchy by Enrico Malatesta. Dearest Fabri, upon the question that so occupies your mind, that of the dictatorship of the proletariat, it seems to me that we are fundamentally in accord. Upon this question, it seems to me that there can be no doubt among anarchists, and in fact, there was none prior to the Bolshevik Revolution. Anarchy signifies non-government, and therefore a greater reason non-dictatorship, which is an absolute government without control and without constitutional limitations. But when the Bolshevist Revolution broke, several of our friends confused that which was the revolution against the pre-existent government and that which was the new government that came to superimpose itself upon the revolution so as to split it and direct it to the particular ends of a party, and they came themselves very close to claiming to be Bolshevists. Now, the Bolshevists are simply Marxists, who have honestly and coherently remained Marxist, unlike their masters and models. The Gezdis, the Plekhanovs, the Hindmans, the Schneidermans, the Noskes, who finished, as you know. We respect their sincerity. We admire their energy. But as we have not been in accord with them on the ground of theory, we cannot affiliate with them when from theory they pass to action. But perhaps the truth is simply this, that our Bolshevist friends intend, with the expression, quote, dictatorship of the proletariat, merely the revolutionary act of the workers in taking possession of the land and of the instruments of labor and trying to constitute for organizing a mode of life in which there would be no place for a class that exploited and oppressed the producers. Understood so, the dictatorship of the proletariat would be the effective power of all the workers intent on breaking down capitalist society, and it would become anarchy immediately upon the cessation of reactionary resistance, and no one would attempt by force to make the masses obey him and work for him. And then our dissent would have to do only with words. Dictatorship of the proletariat should signify dictatorship of all, which certainly does not mean dictatorship, as a government of all is no longer a government in the authoritarian, historic, practical sense of the word. But the true partisans of the dictatorship of the proletariat do not understand the word, so, as they have clearly shown in Russia, obviously, the proletariat comes into it as the people comes into democratic regimes, that is to say, simply for the purpose of concealing the true essence of things. In reality, one sees a dictatorship of a party, or rather of the heads of a party. And it is a true dictatorship, with its decrees, its penal laws, its executive agents, and above all, with its armed force that serves today also to defend the revolution for its external enemies, but that will serve tomorrow to impose upon the workers the will of the dictators, to arrest the revolution, consolidate the new interests, and finally defend a new privileged class against the masses. Bonaparte, who served to defend the French Revolution against the European reaction, but in defending it, he killed it. Lenin, Trotsky, and their companions are certainly sincere revolutionaries, as they understand the revolution and the will not betray it. I think it's, and they will not betray it. But they prepare the governmental cadres that will serve those that will come, who will profit from the revolution and kill it. They will be the first victims of their method, and with them, I fear, will fall the revolution. And history will repeat itself. Mutatis mutandis. It was the dictatorship of Robespierre that brought Robespierre to the guillotine and prepared the way for Napoleon. These are my general ideas upon things in Russia. Inasmuch as the news we get from Russia is too contradictory to base upon it a judgment, it is possible that many things that seem bad are the fruit of the situation, and that in the peculiar circumstances in Russia, it was impossible to do otherwise that was done. It is better to wait, much worse so, in that whatever we might say would have no influence upon the developments in Russia, and might be ill-interpreted in Italy and seem to echo the interested calumnies of the reaction. The important thing is what we must do. But there we go again. I am far away, and it is impossible for me to do my part. So, there's a number of things going on there, right? Like, he's warning. He's saying, listen, if the leadership of the Bolsheviks continues down certain paths, Malatesta can foresee how that could ultimately, that sort of methodology could be used to corrupt the ultimately the broader socialist project. He's also quick, if you notice at the end, though, to point out, like, look, more than once he's talking about, but I'm not there. And I can foresee that there's things going on that make it a situation where literally nothing different could be done. This is the only thing that could be done. Echoing what is to be done, right? This Lenin of Italy. And I think that this is something that should be a foundational element of the relationship, I guess, between modern anarchists and communists. Is I think communists, they need to hear this critique. Like when an anarchist comes and says, hey, I was looking at your methodology. If it's a specific thing, not some arbitrary bullshit like, in the abstract, your theory will ultimately mean this or that. No. This communist proposal for a specific thing, and this communist body that has a specific sort of proposal, if an anarchist feels like, hey, I can see it potentially, this specific thing potentially leading to corruption and the undoing of our project, communists should listen to that specific critique. If an anarchist comes along and goes, communists are tankies and everything just ends up with them being authoritarian, fuck that person. They're not reading anarchists. They're not in line with Malatesta, one of the people who defined anarchism. Okay? But this is, again, a symbiotic relationship, fam. This is not to say, here's why I think you're bad, communist. It's to say, how do we work together to make sure our project is successful in the end, right? And that we don't allow nefarious characters to slip into our project and pervert it, right? Anarchists can be good at that. One of the reasons a lot of people become anarchists, I think, is because they have this deep, deep, deep freaked out thing about any type of authoritarian figure. I'm one of those. And when we come at each other in this thing where we're like, okay, well, you're an anarchist and I'm a communist, and so I don't know, and then you're expecting there to be divisions. What are we doing? Malatesta was talking about we need to support all forms of revolution, but we need to be able to critique each other as well. If it's done in good faith and it's done in respect and it's not a knee-jerk thing like, oh, well, I saw somebody barf some crap about Bakunin and Marx on Twitter, so I'm hesitant of communists and tankies. So, chances are they're going to fuck everything up and make everybody fucking slaves and shit. Well, that's not necessarily true, but and let me say this too. When I talk about if there's a critique of a specific proposal by some communist body, that we can look at maybe and say, hey, I can see how potentially this could lead to some type of authoritarian thing. That's rare as fuck that you're even going to come across that. My experience as an anarchist who's never had any type of issue with fucking blocking up and getting down in an organizing room with communists is that the vast majority of their things that they propose for any given situation, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's go do that. Seriously. Oh, okay. And I'm not seeing it become any type of thing that would ever have the potential for authoritarianism. I just don't see it. I'm like, wow, this is a great way to advocate for some oppressed people. Can I help?